All right, so it's now 1 o'clock. It looks like we have kind of a small session today, but that'll be good. People can unmute themselves if they'd like to ask questions as this goes along. The session is a conversation on remote learning resources and support, and we're glad to have several experts on this topic with us today. Let's see. So some logistics as we go through this. This is going to be a Q&A. We've got a few questions to kind of get the discussion started. But if anyone has questions as we go along, you can either put them in the chat box, or like I said, if you want to unmute yourself, I'll leave that capability up since this is a pretty small session. A member of the NE staff, Tom Hairston, is going to be monitoring the chat box and passing along those questions to our panelists. And we are recording, so if you want to go back and watch any part of this, or if you want to share with anyone who wasn't able to join, we will have that up later today on our blog page, which is neadvantage.com/blog. So thank you to our panelists for joining today. We have Christie Terry, an educational specialist with the eMINTS National Center, Kathryn Fishman-Weaver, she's the director of Mizzou Academy, and Lindsey Hunt, the assistant principal at Iowa Connections Academy. So thank you all for being with us today. So we'll get started with some first questions that have come up with us here at the Network for Educator Effectiveness. We support a lot of school administrators in helping with teacher evaluation, but we're really serving as more of a facilitator in some of these other broader discussions around remote learning right now. And so some of these questions we've seen from some of the school leaders that we support. And so we'll get started with these. And as anyone has questions, again, just put those in the chat box. So the first question we have is, how can we support students who don't have reliable internet access? We'll just open that up to the panel.
So I can start. This is Lindsey Hunt, and I can start, and I can tell you what we're doing. So we are really lucky right now because we're one of 3 schools in operation in the state of Iowa, and we were only given clearance to operate if we could ensure that all of our students had access to the content or the curriculum. So we did a wide sweeping, we did a call blast. We talked to every kid, so about 600 kids within a day and a half, to confirm that they did have internet access. And then after that, so as we've been talking to kids, like some kids may be using hotspots, or some were using like a public library, and now that library is shut down. So we have an internal project management system where we start to say, okay, what are we doing? We get all the teachers together, and we get the packet material together to send to the kid. It's delivered to them with self-addressed stamped envelopes so they can send it back. But that's what we're doing right now. We've had 4 kids over the last 3 days that have lost access. And that's what we take it as like almost an emergency. Like if you don't have access, this is what we're doing. Teachers have about 2 hours to get their stuff uploaded. We have somebody print, mail it, it goes out. And we want the turnaround time to be less than 24 hours from when a kid says, I don't have access, to when we are mailing things out of the office. That's just what we are doing specifically.
So, I mean, I have some suggestions that are more aimed at schools that are trying to support the student body that they have with the connectivity that they have. And it's a little bit different situation, especially for like our rural schools who kind of have to work with what they have, and many of them don't have connectivity. So the first thing I would do is think about that connectivity is really a equity issue. So many of our students who are living in poverty are students of color, or more likely to be relying on cell phone rather than full internet access, like, high bandwidth internet access. And some of our rural students, they only have access to satellite, which is like really slow upload rates and only fast download rates and things like that. So you really have to think about that. And so the first thing I would say is just think about your bandwidth load. Like, keep it as light as possible, because people are really struggling, not to mention that the load right now overall on our entire system infrastructure is heavy. So that's the first thing I would think about. The second thing I would think about is, things that are video, conferencing, those things that are heavy loads. And I know that people want to connect to their students. They want to see their faces. Make those optional though, so that people who really don't have the capacity, they're not feeling like they're failing to meet your expectations. And then if you can, and you have a secure way to do that, send out a video message. But be careful about doing that, about sending out videos with your students in them, because when you send them out, you lose control of their image, of what they're saying, those sorts of things. So I would caution to be careful about that. There are also resources, and I'll put a couple links in the chat, that are out there right now to try and help sort of catch that last mile, help those students who don't have coverage. There's a nonprofit called everyoneon.org, and I'll type it in there. And it is a clearinghouse for resources that are helping schools connect students. So what they do is you put in your zip code and they say, okay, here are connectivity options in your area, including companies that have committed to the Keep America Connected pledge. So I would definitely look into that. One of those companies is Mobile Beacon. We've had some success with them, with our folks who work out in rural areas. I think they use Sprint carrier, but, and they're different carriers. And so obviously some areas have different carriers have better coverage. And so kind of thinking about that aspect. And theirs is $10 a month. And then if you have students who are who qualify, then there's assistance from the federal government to help them pay. I think it's up to $9.97 a month to help pay for their internet. So then you're talking about a very low pennies cost for those schools, but for those families, but it's work to get the paperwork done, those sorts of things. So I would advise, like, if you have faculty who aren't working on curriculum right now because, a lot of schools are focusing on core curriculum, maybe help them become a resource group for your parents to help them get this paperwork done, to find those connections that can really help those families cope during this really hard time. I'll probably think of a few more as the discussion continues, but those are the ones that I kind of had jotted down ahead of time.
I'd echo a lot of what Lindsey and Christie have said already. In particular, that at this moment we have to think about this as an equity issue. So as our schools are implementing new solutions rapidly and with lots of compassion, a reminder to really think about the user experience of what we're creating and what we're asking our students to do. So as we look at a lesson, to think through, what does this mean for student X and for student Y? Is it possible? Is it equitable? How can we create learning opportunities that don't require a student to be connected throughout the whole time, that are asynchronous, where a student can download something when they have a connection, interact with the material so that we can really limit the connection that is required. And then I'd also really echo what Christie was saying, and thank you for those resources, that I've been so impressed and really moved by the response of private and public organizations who've said, we want to take this on and we want to be of support right now. Service providers who are willing to waive costs, companies who are willing to help us fund Wi-Fi hotspots for students in need. So, we think about wraparound services a lot in education. We don't usually think about connection as a wraparound service, but in this moment that's shifted a little bit. So I would encourage educators to really use their resources and think of this as a community project.
I would add to that a lot of schools have done inventories of what technology students have at home, but remember their parents are working at home right now too. So that inventory may reflect the family's resources, but a lot of those resources are going to the parents who are trying to keep the paycheck coming, stay connected with their workplace. So also keep that in mind as you think about it. As light a load as possible is good for everyone. Another thought that I had was we have a local librarian here who actually laid out in front of her house piles of books 6 feet apart. So kids on the walk could take a walk and come and get a pile of books to read at home. So that's another thing to think about. It's like, how can you get resources in the hands of your kids that are supplemental and in a way that isn't scary for them or their family, because any contact adds to our stress. So think about if you want to have a day where you lay out envelopes of activities or books, things that you're not afraid of getting taken away. These were books that had been redacted, like from the library, and were going away anyway. And lay them out and say, today is first grade pickup day, and people can come by, take a walk, and grab some materials. So it doesn't have to be high tech to be supportive and help people feel connected. And if you can, even writing like a little note, like have teachers get together and write a note per kid to stick in there. Even if it's an email that you print off, so it's, the only person who's contacting it is that one person who's doing the printing. You can create a sense of community and connection with paper in a way that feels good for students. So just a few low-tech suggestions.
And other districts may be doing this, but my students' local district here, or my kids, sorry, not my students, my kids' local district, they're using bus routes to drop off kids' packets that don't have access to reliable internet, or if that's just not their preference for learning, because some kids it's very, very hard. So we're using that to get things to students, and there's no context for the kids, and we're doing the food drop-offs like that too. They'll put a cooler or something at the end, and the people running those routes will drop them off either in the cooler or in a mailbox or something like that.
That's great. Thank you all. There's lots of great resources and ideas there. Moving on to our next question. So we've already mentioned this is a really rapidly changing environment. What support do teachers need right now as they're moving to online teaching?
I think an important message for teachers right now is affirmation that none of us planned for this, that school isn't continuing as normal. And I think that it's important for teachers to hear that right now. I think that we're all under tremendous pressure, that educators are committed to doing an excellent job always and to putting students first always, and that they're really looking for unprecedented guidance in this moment to what does that mean? And so I think the more that we can do to help teachers really focus on what is essential. And so that starts with some of the things we've already talked about, like community, like relationships, which educators excel at. So how can we continue to center that? And then as we look at curriculum, it's a similar process, right? What's essential? What must our students have, knowing that we're in a different environment now? The activities that we love to do in groups in our classroom may or may not be possible in this new environment. But what do we want students to really learn in the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 or 8, and to give educators permission that less is more when we focus on what's essential.
We keep talking a lot about, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, Lynsie, you go first.
Okay, we keep talking just a lot about flexibility, because teachers are so hard on themselves just as a profession. And so guys, we're just talking to them, guys, we have to be flexible. It's very hard because everybody's got kids at home. That makes things very different for all of us, even though like my teacher used to working at home, but they're not used to working from home with their kids. So you just have to be extremely flexible. from the administrative side, and after talking to my teachers, we start the week with a loose and a tight. So I say, hey guys, at the beginning of the week, these are what I need you to focus on. So these are the big things we need to get done or whatever it is throughout the week. And then the loose things, like if we get to them, we do. There's just a lot less structure around some of those things. And they've appreciated just kind of saying these are the priorities. It may not be very many priorities, but that's okay. There's still some guidance on what direction to take, because we're a group of people that have lived on a bell schedule our entire life. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, that's completely gone. So what does that look like for me? And then the other thing is I keep trying to push to my teachers, because like I said, even in our world, we're a virtual school. It's different for us. I just keep saying, guys, use this as an opportunity to do all of those things you always wanted to do as a teacher. You want to do supplemental fun videos. You want to do these things. Like, let this be a time to kind of let some of those stresses go away. The state testing, that's gone. We don't have to worry about that. Some of those big things that kind of hang over our heads sometimes and take the fun out of teaching. Let's use this time as a time to really focus on all those things we've ever wanted to do as a teacher, and let it bring us joy and focus around that versus just, like I said, some of those things we tend to focus on.
Both Kathryn and Lynsie have great advice, and I would add some things that are about providing teachers some guidelines that help them feel like, okay, I have some rules of the road that give me some certainty. Kind of like, you know, you give a student an assignment with no guidelines, they're going to freak out. So trying to help your teachers feel like they have some guidelines to paint the lanes for them a little bit. So one of them is like encourage them to limit the number of applications or logins that parents are required to do each day, because they're trying to manage their work and help their students as well. So the more systems that students have to log into each day, the more stressed parents are, and the more stressed parents are, the more that they pass that stress to the teachers. The next thing I would say is that think very carefully. I see a lot of teachers using things like Facebook. Remember, Facebook is really not intended for a platform for students to log into themselves. Those are platforms that are really intended for parent communication. Students really shouldn't be logging into Facebook themselves. There's a lot of scary information and misinformation on Facebook. And yet I'm seeing a lot of Facebook Live events for students from teachers. I'm not saying it's bad, but just remember the load that then puts on parents who should be the ones who are logging into Facebook. So it's just another system to kind of think about. How are you managing it? How are you using it? I would also suggest for them to kind of, yeah, we don't have those bells anymore, but remember that people at home also don't have those bells anymore. And so kind of posting and keeping to a schedule. Like, I will communicate with parents Sunday evenings about what's going to happen the next week. It gives parents a time and a place, a family to log in, make sure everybody's on the same page. Again, it feels like it's a to-do for teachers, but it's also supportive for teachers because it clarifies things. It relieves that stress. Also, again, as everybody else said, like, do not talk about accountability, evaluation as much as you possibly can. Talk about like support, mental health, keeping people connected. That's really the role that we're fulfilling right now. And the goal is not to keep learning, extending, having kids learn more, which would be great. But right now we're sort of like trying to hold the line and keep their mental health. And that's got to be the biggest focus for us, is feeling like we're part of a community. We're not isolated, that things aren't as scary, and a little bit of normality in kids' lives. And then thinking about just like direct support for teachers, there's just a flood of information right now for teachers out on the internet, telling them to try this tool, use this curriculum, here's this lesson we've got. It's overwhelming. So if you do want them to use some of those things, again, use your resource teachers who maybe aren't focusing on core curriculum right now, or aren't considered core curriculum, which We love them all, regardless of what they teach. But let them be resource people to help pick through those things and find gems for people. Remember that most of those, or many of those free resources do not comply with SIPA, COPA, FERPA. And so, you know, have your tech folks review those things for teachers, because the last thing they need is then to also feel like legally they're on shaky ground. Like, let them know these are things that we've reviewed for you. Take the stress out of it for them. Let's see. I would say that like I said, this is not a time to adopt a lot of new stuff. This is a time to use the things that you have in place as best you can. But it is a time to start planning for the future, because we know that this isn't going to go away overnight. We know that this is going to come in waves, and even after school goes back in session, we may have times when there's going to be an outbreak and everybody has to go back online for a while. So one of the things that can help relieve stress is letting teachers know this is experimental. We're just trying it out. We're seeing how things go. Collect feedback for us. We want to know what you think, what worked, what didn't work. And we're planning for the future. So we're not always going to be flying by the seat of our pants. This is temporary, and we're going to figure it out together. And knowing that there is a plan for the future can help relieve some of that stress as well.
Thank you. So we touched on the third question a little bit in that answer. Thank you, Christie. But let's dive into a little bit more specifics. I think, you know, one of the biggest concerns that we've been hearing in some of the sessions that we've had is that administrators and teachers are just really concerned about overwhelming parents, overwhelming students with communication right now and resources, and just piling on all of that information. So what are the best ways that we can be communicating with teachers, with students and families right now?
Sorry, I'll talk from my perspective. I think whatever it is, and you probably want to, in my opinion, like, this is what we try to do, is streamline how we're communicating with people. Like, what can they expect from us? All of our teachers use a Google Voice number, so they don't have to use their personal phone numbers for all of their students. And some people feel like feel different ways about that. But if you've got people using different things, so you've got somebody, you know, this teacher using Facebook to communicate, this teacher is only using email, this teacher is using Zoom, this teacher, it gets extremely overwhelming from the parent side of things. And going back to, I'm not for sure who said it, but just saying, like, if our parents are stressed out doing it, they're going to show that. I mean, their kids are going to feel that, we're going to feel that, everybody's going to feel that. So as much as you can streamline the communication that's going out, so they know what to expect. And then another way that we handle it is we try to give a point person for every kid. So it's even the high school kids, like, you know, we call it advisory, or our homeroom teachers. So that is that family's point person. And we try to give one family, so if we're communicating as a school, that whole family has one point person, so they don't have to try to keep up with necessarily calls from this person, this person, this person, because they have 3 kids in the house and now they're getting all of this different information. So probably my recommendation would be try to streamline it as much as possible. But that also goes with staff too. I was telling people a little bit ago, we use Google Hangouts. That's our mode of communication with all of our teachers. So they know that's what you look at. Like, obviously they check their email too, but that's how we're communicating. I'm not sending you a text message. You're going to get this text message and an email and this. Streamline it to make it as efficient as possible, but also so it just sets the communication standards. If I send something really important, it's going to be here, or this is where I need you to look for the information. And then utilizing something like Google Hangouts allows the teachers to communicate with each other and gives them a very safe place. And know, like, I mean, if they want to talk to somebody or if they have a question, they can put it in one of the group chats and they'll get an answer within seconds most of the time, or if I need to talk to somebody specifically, but just streamlining how that communication is going out, and then how much is going to families by maybe making a point person or something like that.
Yeah, I would just reiterate the schedule of communication as well, because you know, like, again, parents are really facilitating this, and they have certain times of the day that they're going to have free. They're going to be free to check email or check into that Facebook page. And so just make sure that you're keeping a consistent schedule for communicating with them, so they know when they can check in, know that they won't be missing anything. My daughter was really stressed out because we missed an online meeting because we check every morning, and then I set up their work from 8 to 9, and then I go and do my work. And somewhere around 10 o'clock, a meeting invitation came out, and she missed it because I was then in online meetings and doing things on my own. So creating that schedule can help parents facilitate their students' learning more effectively and their schedules.
Agree. Again, as I'm thinking about formal communication in this time, so as I'm thinking about email in particular, recognizing that we're all being inundated with messages, with a load we have yet to experience. And so as I'm thinking about messages that I'm sending to faculty, to students, to families, to other stakeholders, I'm trying to use kind of some formula, some writing process, best practices. So I try and start with a check-in. So I think it is essential in this moment, and always, but particularly in this moment, that we focus on community. So I try to start with a check-in that is at the personal, human, social, emotional level. And then whatever my message is, I'm finding that I'm using bullets, I'm using recap, I'm streamlining as much as possible because people are overloaded with information right now. And then I try and close with a connect, so that folks know, okay, what's coming next? You'll hear from me at such and such point. You'll hear from these people at such and such point. We're going to gather in this online space so that they know the community is continuing. And then, you know, obviously we can't be perfect and need to let go of some pressure, but I'm reading and rereading and editing and getting a second set of eyes on things more and more, to avoid you get this really long email and then 30 seconds later you get the correction that's also a really long email. I want to limit that as I think about user experience again. So I'm thinking about those things in the formal. And then in the informal, I want to really echo something Lyndsey said, which is the need for community. So we also have a faculty text group, and we use that a lot for community building. And I'm putting kind of community building prompts in that text group more. What are things you're thankful for? Share a funny picture of your pets. We need to remember that we're in this together and that we're for each other. So creating communication spaces for those purposes.
Yeah, I would say encourage teachers when they're experiencing success, to jot it down, write it, share it with their peers. Here's this great thing I did. We can sometimes be protective as teachers of like, oh, I do this thing and I do it in my class and I want to save it for my kids. But this is a time to get people sharing their ideas, patting each other on the back. If you can, you know, do those Zoom meetings for your teachers, you know, have them do a Zoom happy hour or coffee clutch, you know, just to help them stay connected, because our teachers get lonely and isolated too.
Thank you. So we're coming to the last prepared question. So I just wanted to remind our participants that if you have anything that you want to ask yourself, go ahead and submit those questions via the chat box. We want to make sure that we allow some time for those questions to be answered as well. So the last question has to do with evaluation. So that's an area that we support schools in, and I think that's one of the reasons that we got this question. So first I wanted to turn things over to Tom Hairston to kind of give our approach to how we're guiding schools during this time.
Sure. Thank you, Kendra, and thank you first to our panelists for the great information so far, and to the participants listening in as well. One of the first kind of decisions we made here with the Network for Educator Effectiveness as kind of this nationwide snowball rolling down the hill and gaining steam of schools being out and dismissing and everything being thrown into flux, we made the decision very early on that we were recommending at the school level that evaluation cease at that point, and that those formal evaluations, any type of observation, anything new data-wise, be stopped and focus really on the feedback that you as an instructional leader could give to a teacher about, from your eyes, from your vantage point of instruction, what may be missing, what are some things to think about in communicating or helping streamline for parents, for students, and how can we approach those in the most cohesive and consistent manner possible. And so when thinking about, oh, I really want to check in with teachers, have those check-ins definitely, and come at it more from that coaching aspect of, I see my teacher here, here's the positive things we can focus on as saying, this is great, keep working towards it. Kind of, as our panelists mentioned earlier, of build on what's great, build on that strength right now and continue going forward. The other major discussion we're having for the Network for Educator Effectiveness right now is what happens long term if this worst case scenario of something like 18 months occurs. What then does the next school year look like? And how do we evaluate teaching at that time? Because at some point, this new normal we've all been forced into kind of becomes just the new normal that now we have to accept and work through. And so at the Network for Educator Effectiveness, we're having those discussions about next year, if this is continuing, how can we provide evaluation resources, evaluation services for schools to continuously improve and increase the effectiveness of these distance learning styles, distance learning structures that we've been learning about, hearing about today.
Thank you, Tom. And so I wanted to turn it over to our panelists now to talk about, how do we and even should we evaluate the effectiveness of remote learning? I think from us, as Tom mentioned, we're kind of recommending against those formal evaluation measures and really looking at it from a feedback and support standpoint. But we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. And also one of the other questions that we've got is what is too much or too little when it comes to remote learning. I think that's in reference to some of the assignments and resources that teachers might be putting out.
I can go ahead and start. How do we and should we evaluate the effectiveness of remote learning for that? Remote learning, and I'm sure Kathryn and Lynsie can speak to this even more than I can, is really about a lot of work on the front end. So teachers need to put a lot of planning into their class and how things are going to go. A lot of it happens in the front end. You're not as much, you're not having these spontaneous interactions with students as much. You're really planning it all ahead of time. So remote learning is as much, or I would say even more, an evaluation of the plan and how it's put together as it is the facilitation. I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe the balance isn't right, but I would say that it's very, very important, that plan piece. And so when we're looking right now at evaluating teachers, they haven't had that planning at all. And so it doesn't make sense to evaluate them on this sort of pull it all together as fast as we can experience. I mean, really, that isn't an evaluation of their teaching skills or their planning skills. It's an evaluation of their emergency management skills. So I would not engage in evaluation right now. Then as you move forward and you think about how are we going to evaluate remote learning in the future, then that planning has to be a part of it, and it has to be important that you take into account how remote learning has to be different from face-to-face interaction. And so there's some groundwork that needs to be done there to understand the differences in planning and student experiences and facilitation from what you'd expect to see in a face-to-face classroom. Again, I'm sure Lyndsey and Kathryn have way more to say about this from their experience being leaders in virtual schools. So I'm gonna step back from that one. What is too much or too little? The thing that I would say about this is that your families are really overwhelmed right now. And it's not just as much of what your student has capacity to do in the day, like how many free hours a day. It has to do with how much capacity those parents have as well to carve out the space to help their students get organized, do the work that needs to be done. So partially it's going to depend on the age of your students, but partially it's just you're going to have to give a lot of slack to folks about this because they're really struggling. So, you know, personally, I would say 2 to 3 hours a day. That might be light by some people's consideration. Yes, lots of grace and prayer, but that's where I'm gonna go right now. In our own school district here in Columbia, where my kids go to school, teachers were feeling sort of like prove that they're really still engaged and they're working hard, and you know, parents know this. We are so grateful and so appreciative, putting on my parent hat here, for all that teachers are doing for our kids. And they don't have to push themselves to prove that they care. We know they care. So the school district actually just announced this morning they're taking a pause because parents were overwhelmed. They couldn't do it all. And there are a lot of I think stressed out parents stressing out at teachers. And so don't be afraid to take a pause and adjust and say, nope, we overdid it, or nope, we weren't doing enough, and move up and down that scale. The other thing is that, yeah, so 1 hour a week, that's lovely. So, I mean, we're looking at different approaches here. The other thing is that try and have some place where your parents can give feedback about how it's working without having it be a burden or a complaint box that's for your teachers, right? So have somebody from your district level or your school leadership level reach out to parents and say, how's it going? Have we dialed it in right? Give me feedback, so that it doesn't turn into a whole bunch of people complaining to teachers who are then feeling like, I'm trying so hard and people don't like what we're doing, right? So it gives them a little bit of protection, and then you can go to teachers and say, you know what, we've been talking to parents, we just need to dial it in a little bit better, so that you can kind of cushion that, because everybody's stressed out and sometimes that communication can come off as more harsh than anybody really intends because of that.
There's a lot there. Let me build off of some of what Christie said, and then we may circle back around because I could forget things. So as we're thinking about evaluating remote learning or online learning, I absolutely agree with Christie that this is not online remote learning as usual. We're not even in a moment right now in many school districts where we can implement many best practices in online or remote learning. So as I think about the work that we're doing at Mizzou Academy as we're launching new online and blended courses, we think about how embedded curriculum and instruction are to each other. So as we think about designing a new course, we think about how is that course going to be taught and implemented, and that informs the technical tools that we use in the course. It informs our scope and sequence. It informs, all aspects of the planning. And that's not the moment that we're in right now. Right now we're in a crisis moment, and we're doing the absolute best that we can, and leaning certainly experts, leaning on thought leaders in online education, in remote learning, in crisis work, and taking what we can and trying to center on what matters most. So I think the general approach that I've heard, which is let's be uber gracious right now with educators who are working in crisis, is spot on and humane. I think that, and I've heard this in our conversation today as well, I think that some of the weight of evaluation falls right now on school leaders, on some of the decisions that our school leaders are making. I like the way Lyndsey put it at the beginning of the conversation on kind of what's tight and what's loose, right? And so we know that in all districts I've talked with, one of the things that we want to be tight on is community, that kids know we're there for them. We're cheering for them. We're in this together. One of the things that we want to be tight on is an approach to equity, which has become more complicated in this moment. And part of our approach to equity is where we started the conversation, which is about connection and internet access. But also it's far broader than that. So I look at the really wonderful and difficult work that's happening around food insecurity in our districts. So as we're talking about evaluation in that moment, there are some human needs that we need to address. And then if we also kind of circle back to the beginning where we talked about a focus on what is essential between now and the end of the school year, what do my fourth graders need? What does the eighth grader taking language arts really need to know by the end? And can we boil that down to an essential question, to a few learning targets, and do the best that we can to hit those targets? And if so, that's success. And that's what we're aiming for right now. I think that Tom's point about looking long-term, so were this to happen next year, were this to continue into next year, where we just start a school year, we would start in a different place, right? So were we to start the school year here, if we think that's coming, and as we get more information every single day, as we continue to get more information into this summer, then my advice would be that we lean more on experts to implement best practices in online education from the start of the school year in August and September, and we really lean on those best practices then. I like something that Christie said earlier, which is related to this whole conversation, which is, what are we learning? I think that's a critical question for teachers, for families, for school leaders. And those lessons that we're learning, how can we take and implement those in new ways? I think that our schools will be changed after this experience, and I think that many of those changes will be beneficial. We found new ways to connect. We found new tools that work, and we found tools that don't work at all, and we're not going to use those again. Those are really important lessons. We weren't planning on learning those in March or April of 2020, but we are. So how can we implement those lessons in the future, I think, is part of how we're evaluating what's happening right now, which is a different evaluation moment.
And I only have just a couple of points. I think one of the biggest things, just to reiterate what you just said, the changes that are going to come out of this, and this is what I keep telling my teachers, the changes that are going to come out of this are going to make us stronger, and we're going to be better because of it. We were forced into a situation where we were able to see and evaluate holes that were there, and now we get to work to fix those things, and we're going to be better because of it. Then to talk really quickly about evaluation, and the only evaluation would, in my opinion, would really be about actually evaluating the effectiveness of remote learning, not the evaluation of the teacher administering remote learning. Because it goes back to, like what you said, the plan, it's a bigger, it's bigger than just one little piece. It's a big plan, and that's what we need to probably evaluate or spend most of our time evaluating. And then, not to say it's a free-for-all for everybody, it shouldn't be, because it goes back to that loose and tight, like I said. And then the last piece, talking about what's too much or too little. Someone recommended an hour per subject area per week. As a parent, I have witnessed my kids being really engaged in some things that I've never seen them engaged on. I have a lot of kids at home. I have 6 kids at home, and they're all over the place, and their abilities and their want for learning, their desire to do remote versus the packet. But what I've been able to get rid of all that other fluff sometimes, and kids are able to boil it down to, I'm going to focus on this up for my geometry. They may get that done in an hour, and that's absolutely okay. That's absolutely okay. If it's not, well, they're not sitting there for 8 hours. Well, no, they shouldn't be sitting there for 8 hours a week. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. But it really is amazing what our kids can do when we remove some of those things that happen in a traditional brick and mortar. So scaling back what we expect. Like if you think, is this too much? It probably is too much. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, the only thing that I might consider as an evaluation metric for teachers, and it would be a light metric, it would just maybe be a reminder or check-in, is maybe making sure that they connect with families each week. And so whether that's an email communication or a phone call or, high tech, low tech, whatever it takes, just to make sure that there's a check-in, that you're checking on the family, you're checking on the kid, they know that you're there, they're there to provide support.
So sorry, but to tag onto that, that's something that we do as well. So whatever you say, like we'll keep a Google sheet or whatever it is that has something that I can have access to, and every teacher has like their homeroom kids. And so right now during this, we're asking them to make contact every week for various reasons, but just so we can see, is there anybody that's kind of a red flag? So just being able to apply like a data piece to it, to be able to say, okay, this is everybody that I've talked to, because now it's been 2 weeks since I haven't talked to this particular family. We probably need to ramp up our efforts to get a hold of them just to make sure everything's okay and things like that. So good call on that.
Yep, completely agree. And that's the conversation that we've been having too, with the same metric, with the once a week, we make sure that we've touched base with everyone so that no one's falling through the cracks. I'm really glad that you said that. The other thing I was thinking about, as Lyndsey, as you were talking about time, and this kind of comes back to the idea that we're in a different moment now. Like, what is time? Like, I don't even know what day it is most days anymore. And I'm finding that's true for other people too. But as we think about time and we think about learning, I'm reminded in these moments at home, working and learning with my own kids, that learning happens in lots of different environments and lots of different ways. So yes, my daughter, for example, is engaged in math learning when she's playing on the math app or when she's working in the math packet. But also there's some things that are happening as we're home. She's building things in the garage with her brother. We're going on walks together. We're noticing the birds. We're having conversations about the seasons and change. And all of that is learning. And so to find ways to affirm for our families and for our teachers that learning can happen in lots of different ways outside of the packets, outside of the devices, and to honor those moments that we don't normally get with our kids. I think about the conversations that are happening between siblings during the day as they engage in all matters of things, and that there's some learning that's happening there too. So I just want to encourage all of us to recognize that learning as well.
Very well said. Great point.
All right, so one question that came in from Terry Steffes, what one tool do you suggest that teachers can use that gives them a wide variety of choice when using? So many tools seem one-dimensional.
I would say stick with the tools that you and your families already know. So if your school has a learning management system that allows you to have, discussions and post resources and those sorts of things, I would be more worried about narrowing the number of tools and focusing on one or two that people already know how to use, then I would be worrying about adopting a new, magic product that's going to solve all the problems. So it's a good question, but it's more of a future-oriented question than it is about this time right now, I would say.
Great, thank you. All right. There's some sharing of some resources in the chat box as well, but I haven't seen really any additional questions coming through. So I don't know if you all have any final thoughts you want to offer, or if we should go ahead and wrap it up.
Well, I don't have final thoughts, but one source that my teachers started using this year that was really helpful for parents and got a lot of positive feedback was all of our teachers have a You Can Book Me link. And everybody, this may be old news to everybody else, but our kids and our parents found that is just a really great way. They knew, like, if they got stuck with something, they could book an appointment with the teacher instead of like having to wait for a webmail. And the teacher says webmails are internal email system, so wait for a return on that or a phone call, and then they can just go in and book a time with that teacher at a time that works for them. And then the teacher is given a heads up. This is what they want to talk about. So they can be prepared, and then they call them at exactly that time. But that's a tool that has helped us a lot this year, and parents gave a lot of positive feedback on opening up something like that. So not even a final thought, but that's a resource that's working well for us.
Could you repeat the name of that, please?
You Can Book Me.
Thank you.
And so the teachers can set like the times, so people aren't booking things at like 10 o'clock at night or whatever it is. But you set the times that people can book those links with you. And then like we have a big Google spreadsheet with everybody's You Can Book Me link on it, so kids and parents have access. So they don't have to filter through and kind of find each teacher. And actually every teacher puts it on their webmail too, but they can access all their teachers You Can Book Me. So if they're really struggling on geometry, they can just go in and book a time for that.
So the eMINTS National Center, which is here at the University of Missouri, we've been doing online and ed tech work for a long time, and our staff are committed to providing one-on-one support for any teacher who wants it. We initially talked about just Missouri, but it's, we don't say no to anybody. So if you send us an email, there's a link on our front of our webpage, or send me an email. I'm sure their contact information will go out. We would be happy to get you scheduled with some support. We have instructional specialists. They'll meet with any teacher, any educator, administrator, and provide what support we can for this during this time.
Thank you, Christie.
And I can add for our organization as well at Mizzou Academy, we're committed to helping with access locally, nationally, and internationally. We have over 200 online courses at the middle and high school level. Do lots of partnership work with districts. So really believe in and value the critical work that happens face-to-face and happens in relationships with teachers, and seek to supplement that. So if we can be a resource going forward as you look to online methods, or even want to implement an online course with your students, we'd be very happy to chat with you. My contact information and our Mizzou Academy contact information is all available on the website, and anytime we're glad to be a resource.
Thank you. And I'll be sure when we write up our summary today and add the recording on our site that we've got your contact information linked there, just to make it really easy, and your website's linked also. Well, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for participating today. I think it was a really rich discussion and a lot of great sharing of resources and ideas. So thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. And keep an eye on our website. It's here, www.kneeadvantage.com/blog. That's where we'll post the summary and the recording of today's session later today. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.